If somebody comes to me and says, why should I sign up with one of your coaches? Because we will help you improve your life, your love, your health, and your wealth. Same thing. It's just different at a different level of the business. One is free, one might cost money. One is an episode every day, one is a coaching call every 2 weeks. That is how you can really monetize your podcasts if you do it in the right way and you do it long enough. And the common mistake that's hurting people is they're just out of alignment. Podcast Growth Nation, welcome back to another episode of Podcast Growth University, where we talk all things podcasting all the time. I also realize a lot of what we talk about is connected to podcasting, not necessarily podcasting, but that is okay. I hope you enjoyed the latest episode number 62, 2 things you need to know about Facebook groups. Today, for episode number 63, a common mistake that's hurting your chances of making money with your podcast. It's a challenge because you might ask the question, if you could go back and do it all over again, what would you change? And this is kind of one of those episodes, not necessarily, because if you're early in your podcast, you can change it. One of the common questions I get asked when I go on other podcasts, especially podcasts about podcasts, is how did you guys make money? How did you go from not making any money? Or how did you go from leaving a successful career to making $0 to eventually making money? And the short answer is I started coaching for free. The longer answer, the more valuable answer, the one that'll add value to your life, hopefully, is our podcast is about self-improvement. Our podcast is about habits, and it's about mindset, and it's about relationship, and it's about mental health, and it's about productivity, and all those things, many, many different things. We talked about that on the podcast, so it made sense that if we were going to make money with the podcast, it would be coaching people on something similar, but more valuable. Now, I'm not saying the podcast isn't valuable. What I'm saying is coaching is more specific, but it's still the same thing we were talking about on the podcast. So that's how we started making money. We would talk to people on social media, people who would join the Facebook group, whatever it would be. There'd be many, many different opportunities to connect with people, but we would end up coaching them one-on-one. And that is how we started making money. I started coaching for $50 an hour, and eventually it went up to $75, and then it was $100, and it was $150. And then I kind of stopped doing that style of coaching when we started growing as a podcast, because then we created a podcast production company, Next Level Podcast Solutions. But that is the theme of today's episode. So I want you to imagine this. I was doing a coaching call recently where this person did not start their podcast to make money. That's not the goal. That's not why they started it. But they're in a season right now where they'd like to do it more full time, and they would like to turn it into more of a career. And I said, here's the downside of trying to do that in regards to coaching, because that's how they want to do it. I said, your podcast, the content on your podcast and what you coach people on is drastically different. So imagine if we had a self-improvement podcast, but I was a tax person. I helped people with their taxes. It's not very aligned. So the odds of somebody listening to a self-improvement podcast who is into self-improvement, who would hire a self-improvement coach, are drastically different than the odds that somebody is listening to a self-improvement podcast, but they actually need an accountant or somebody to help them with their taxes. And they're going to do it through this podcast. So the common mistake that is hurting many, many podcasters' chances of making money is the content they talk about on the podcast and what they talk about on social media is not aligned with the services that they offer. And this is a really good question to figure out how profitable your podcast is going to end up being. Potentially. There's a lot of in the weeds stuff here with this. What is your current perceived area of expertise? What is your current perceived area of expertise? Not what do you want your area of expertise to be? Now, yes, you can do something long enough to get that, right? In the beginning, I didn't know anything about self-improvement and I didn't know anything about podcasting, but I've done a lot of reps. But what is your perceived area of expertise is kind of a question of what could you monetize right now if you so chose. It's tough line there. So even in the beginning of our podcast, I was able to coach people on fitness. I might not have been really, really good at the mindset side yet. I didn't know anything about business, so I didn't do any business coaching. But there were times where I would get fitness clients that would end up leading into self-improvement clients. Because at that time, I had already been a personal trainer. I was a bodybuilder. I was in really good shape. For a long time, that was my perceived area of expertise, was fitness. Then that shifted. So if hypothetically, if I'm a personal trainer, my podcast is going to be on fitness and nutrition and exercising, and all the guests I have are going to be on, and they're all going to be talking about the same thing. It's all going to fall into the bucket of fitness. My question for you, whether you're watching or listening, now or in the future, on a scale of 1 to 10, how aligned is your podcast with your area of expertise / monetization point? This is why it's harder for certain shows to make money, because the opportunity to add value through coaching is different. So I always use, and I won't even say coaching, I'll say through one-on-one, I guess it's through products or services. That's the best way to put it, because I don't think ads, sponsorships, and affiliates are products or services. If you have a comedy show, could you coach people on comedy? Yeah, if you wanted to, but odds are the people who are listening to your podcast are not listening so they can get better at comedy. They're listening because they want to laugh. So it would probably be the best course of action for you to do virtual stand-up or in-person stand-up events, that type of stuff. That would make sense, right? You could have a YouTube channel too that's comedy stuff. That would make sense. But if you are a comedy podcast and your products and services aren't connected to comedy, it's probably not going to work that well. So that might be hurting your chances of making money with your podcast. It most likely is. The people who monetize their podcast, at least from my experience, through products and services, it's usually the shows that are the most aligned. So yes, our show is about real estate. Okay, you can coach people on real estate. And here's why that's a thing too. I had an important realization the other day. So I follow someone who I've talked to in the past. I've done free calls with somebody who doesn't have a podcast, but was thinking of starting a podcast. And this person's a fitness coach. So this person shared the other day that they got a new client. That's one of the things they do to help drive interest to their coaching, is every time they get new clients, they share nice videos of their new clients and they say, welcome to the team. And that's a great thing to do. And I clicked on the profile of one of the people that just signed up with coaching, signed up for coaching with this person, because I was curious, what is their target audience? It was very, very interesting because this client was also a fitness coach. So a fitness coach hired a fitness coach to help them. And I had this moment where I realized, oh, okay. There's a lot of people out there who might be doing what you're doing, but if you are ahead of them, quote unquote, with your results, they may end up working with you. So this is going back to the conversations that we had a while ago about listeners versus longers. So as a podcaster, the people who listen to your show are listening to your show because they find value in your content. And if they're going to work with you, it's because your perceived area of expertise is going to bring value to their lives. So self-improvement coach.
Next Level University and Kevin is exactly where you need to be if you're a podcaster. When I first started out just a few months ago, I had no clue on the direction I was going. I was getting hustled by another company that was giving me not even close to the value that Kevin and Next Level U was giving me. They literally changed the trajectory of my podcast, have helped me out tremendously. They understand the clients. I promise you, you will not go wrong with dealing with Kevin and Next Level U. I'll see you there.
here comes the layer under that. If you do something long enough, so let's just say self-improvement show, you become a self-improvement coach. Eventually, you might have longers. So let me just define. Listeners are people who listen to your show and end up becoming part of your ecosystem, and they buy into your brand. So they're in your brand, right? The Next Level You family, they listen to the podcast. They don't really care about Podcast Growth U because they're not podcasters. They're people who love self-improvement, and we love them. Those are listeners. Longers are people who want to build something like you've built. So they might see you as someone who has built a somewhat successful coaching program, and they might reach out and say, hey, not how did you grow your podcast? It might be, hey, how did you turn your business into a coaching business? And then you could actually coach coaches on how to coach. So there's layers to this. So that is something that can happen down the line that is a beneficial byproduct of making sure you brand yourself in the right way. So I know I'm going down rabbit holes here. There's a lot to this. The reason I say that is because you might start a podcast on self-improvement. You might end up being a self-improvement coach, and then another place you can monetize is teaching other self-improvement coaches how to coach and get clients. And that becomes another piece of your business. So for us, I never planned on being a podcast coach. That was never the goal. I never knew I was going to have a podcast about podcasts. That was never it. But we started getting to a certain place where people were asking me a ton of questions about podcasting, mostly longers. I would have longers who would reach out and say, how did you guys get to 300 episodes? How did you guys get to 500 episodes? How did you get to 1,000 episodes? Then it made sense to say, oh, okay, this is hopefully going to connect. That has become a new area of a perceived area of expertise for me. More so than almost anything else at this point, even though I have a podcast about self-improvement with 1,500 episodes, the 1,500 episodes to listeners is great. The 1,500 episodes to longers is different. If you're listening to the show, you might listen to Next Level You, I don't know. But if you're listening to the show, you're most likely a podcaster. So you care about the area of expertise that I have within podcasting, not self-improvement. So that is a long, long, long way of saying you can make it easier on yourself to monetize through products and services, or you can make it harder on yourself. I was talking to someone today who is a branding coach, is probably the best way to explain it. And somebody who's really good at business. They know a ton about business. They've started businesses on different continents. World-class business owner. Their podcast does not represent that. And this person wants more clients. And I said, well, what you need to do is you need to figure out what are the common issues you're having with your clients. So what are their common issues? And you need to start doing episodes on that, because your show right now is not branded as, if you're the type of person who struggles with these things, this is the show for you. We just don't, you're kind of all over the place. You're a little bit all over the place with your show. And I've really been in that season with my clients of, you got to make sure you're honing your show, you're honing your message, you're honing your guests, you're honing your solo episodes to the place where at the top of your business, when somebody says, what is this podcast about? It's how to get better. So for us, how to improve your life, your love, your health, and your wealth. That's the podcast. If somebody comes to me and says, why should I sign up with one of your coaches? Because we will help you improve your life, your love, your health, and your wealth. Same thing. It's just different at a different level of the business. One is free, one might cost money. One is an episode every day, one is a coaching call every 2 weeks. That is how you can really monetize your podcasts if you do it in the right way and you do it long enough. And the common mistake that's hurting people is they're just out of alignment. They started the podcast maybe just from a place of impact, and they get to the place where they want to monetize it. Maybe they just want to talk about a certain thing. But here's a really good example. This is a really good example. I've been on a lot of shows that are for entrepreneurs. So let's just say it's an entrepreneur show. Businesses, growing your business, being more productive, that. The person who runs it is a business owner themselves, but they have a web agency, or they're a web designer or something like that. Yes, since entrepreneurs are listening to your podcast and entrepreneurs need websites, there is a way for you to make that work, but it's not as aligned as if you had a different podcast that was more about search engine optimization and and website building and that type of stuff, getting discovered, right? That type of podcast. Now, can that podcast still do well? Yes, if the person running it knows sales. They can do a good job because they can offer free calls and all that. But you can see how that's not as aligned as something that is a fitness podcast that does personal training on the bottom. So that is my question for you. My apologies if this episode was all over the place. It seems like it's a very easy thing to explain, but it was more challenging than I expected. So it's a good thing. It's a lesson. But also, this is one of the most important things, especially if you haven't started your show yet. Because if you come to me, hypothetically, and you said, hey, I want to start a podcast, but I also want to turn it into a coaching business in the next year or two. Okay. I would say, well, what are you actually capable of coaching on right now? And you might say, I know a ton about web design. Okay. That's going to point me in a different direction than if you said, well, I'm a personal trainer. Okay, if you're a personal trainer, we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to have a podcast that's all about fitness. I'd like you to probably go solo episode heavy, maybe, well, at least every other. Solo episode, guest episode, solo episode, guest episode. It's going to be different. Your social media content's going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a different level of value. So if you're in the beginning, really think about what is my perceived area of expertise that I could actually monetize. If you're deeper in, we might have to get creative. And this is where going on other podcasts is super valuable, because you can go on the podcasts that are hosted or have audiences of your demographic. So that's a whole nother conversation. There's a lot of layers to this. And that's one of the reasons I don't plan on ever stopping this. That's one of the reasons I offer the free podcast breakthrough sessions, because there's only so many things I can talk about, and I can only go so deep, as you can see, in an episode like this, because it might not be relevant to you if you're out there. If you listen to the first 10 minutes and you said, I'm a fitness podcast that talks about fitness and coaches at the bottom of my business, you're good. There is no more, I won't say there's no more value in this episode, but there's a lot of intricacies under that. There's the process of sales and the content and all that stuff. So this is a reason why, if this episode was deep and you got value, I'm more than happy to add more value on a free podcast breakthrough session. Always. That's always going to be there. I won't say it's always going to be there. My plan is to keep it there for as long as humanly possible, until my schedule overwhelms me far beyond what it already is. So in closing, let me see if I can wrap this up nicely. If you could go back in time and make it easier on yourself to make money with your podcast, asking yourself, what is my perceived area of expertise, and can I do a podcast on that, would be a very powerful question to ask. If you're at the stage where you have 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 episodes, there are subtle ways, especially if you're not doing solo episodes yet, where you can focus more on leveraging that. So if you've been having guests on for the last year, you can start throwing in solo episodes where you talk more about your area of expertise, as long as it connects to the podcast in some way. Again, there's layers and layers and layers of this. Thank you for sitting through this with me. I know this is a very deep one, but it's empowering if you did it the right way. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for empowerment if you don't feel like you did it with perfect alignment. There's no such thing as perfect, but because you can make shifts and you can get creative. And this is why not quitting is like the best advice ever, because if you quit because it's not aligned, it's never going to get more aligned. So keep going. Please keep going. Please, please, please keep going. Anything else before I go here? No, I think that's good. The only thing I would add is, there's a lot of layers. Your social media should somewhat be a reflection of the podcast brand. So that will further help you end up getting people to work through the business and say, you know what, this is the type of person I would like to do one-on-one coaching with or whatever it may be. But that's only if your social media, podcast, mailing list, Facebook group, all the stuff lines up the way it should. It makes it easier. It's not impossible to do it without it. And just because you have it all aligned does not mean people are going to come out of the woodwork. All right, we're going to get out of here because I will keep going on this topic. This is a topic that is very, very important to me, and I'm very, very clearly passionate about it. All right, next week for episode number 64, where I will be in Belgium when this drops, or I'll be in Europe. I don't know where exactly. Should you ever pay someone to help with your podcast? And no, this isn't going to be a pitch for why you should work with me or with us. I've just seen a lot of people get taken advantage of, and as somebody in Podcast Growth Nation, I do not ever want that to happen to you. So we're going to talk about that in episode number 64. As always, I appreciate you all very much. I hope the podcasts are fruitful. I hope you're feeling more confident as an interviewer. I hope you're feeling more confident as a speaker and you're using pickle every time you say I hope your guests are awesome. I hope you're getting on other shows. I hope people are listening. I hope you're enjoying the process, because podcasting is a wonderful thing, and I appreciate you tuning into this podcast. I will talk to you all next week, sending you all the love.